Hello, everyone. I'm Ruth Somalo. I'm one of the featured programmers for DocNYC, and it's my great honor to have with me today the Honorable Representative Barbara Lee and the Director of Truth to Power, Barbara Lee Speaks for Me, Ms. Abby Ginzberg. Hello, both of you. Thank you so much for showing a bit of your life and making this wonderful, inspiring film that we so dearly, desperately needed in this like dystopia that we are inhabiting. So welcome both. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Perhaps we should quickly, I think everybody in the film community is aware of Ms. Ginsberg's work. Like, she's a Peabody Award winner. She's been making, social impactful documentaries for over 30 years. We had Waging Change premiere at DocNYC in 2019. And now, you bring us this incredible story of Representative Lee. Tell us a little bit about how this project came about, just to start the conversation, and how did you met this incredible, inspired woman?
I am lucky. I am one of Representative Lee's constituents. So I'm sure I met her somewhere at some constituent event back in the day. I can't even remember when we first met. And I really wanted to tell Congresswoman Lee's story to a broader audience. So I asked, and she was very ambivalent. But I think with a little push from her staff and a little bit of thinking about it, everybody sort of agreed if we could just get going, maybe this would be a good project. And I was convinced and remain convinced, having finished the film, that Barbara Lee is a fabulous person about whom to tell a story. And I just knew that going in. I just knew that, that if she would give me permission to tell her story, that it would be a story other people would be inspired by, would want to know about, and would be surprised by, that there would be some aspects of her story people would not know, both her constituents and others. And there would be, and one of the goals for me for making this film, because it was back in the day, it was before the 2016 and 2018 election, was to inspire other people who never thought of themselves of running for office, to understand how Barbara ran for office and what it took to get her there and what she was inspired by. I thought would inspire a next generation of essentially young women of color to think about running. And then the 2018 election happened, and we saw the impact with all these new members of Congress who actually are young, very committed, women of color. So my goal was a little bit, foreshadowed to some extent a little bit of the 2018 election. But I am so grateful to Barbara Lee for letting me tell her story, and to her staff for making it possible. She is one of the hardest working, hardest to pin down people in terms of her schedule. So the hardest part of this was getting time. I mean, it was one thing to follow her around with a camera, but to get her time to reflect on what we had just seen or what had just happened was complicated, because she had a million other votes coming and a bunch of other meetings. So let me just say again, Barbara, thank you for letting me make this film.
And representatively, it's so rare and inspired to see somebody that is as high-ranking a politician as you are talking about these very personal circumstances, that you've been growing up with, and that you've generously shared with us through the film, and allow, Abby to just get like all this background story of your, how you got your superpowers, and how did you, made all these incredible decisions where you were dealt a really difficult hand, and from your social to your economical circumstances. So can you tell us a little bit about what is it about truth telling, and you, and what is about transparency that can help us discuss all these hard, important issues? And how did you become who you are, basically?
Thanks so much, Ruth. Nice to be with you. Let me just say to Abby, she said I was ambivalent. That's putting it mildly. I was an unwilling subject. And I think this is a testament to her tenacity and her commitment. And as a filmmaker, I knew Abby as a constituent and a filmmaker, but why in the world she wanted to do a film about me, I had no idea. That's the first thing. Secondly, she had a hard time. She's being nice today. She had a hard time doing this film. and it's mainly, and I have to tell you, you talk about transparency, is because I'm a really private person, and I hate people asking me about my personal life. And this has been the way, I've been this way since I was a child. I don't like talking about myself, and I don't like exposing myself, you know, and that comes from, you know, being raised in the Catholic Church and the guilt, and, you know, being the only two African-American girls in a white school. And, you know, you just don't open up. There's too much risk there. But somehow Abby, I think, is a psychotherapist in her last life or in her next life. So she figured out how to make me get halfway past that. Because there's a lot I just wouldn't go into, period, and she knows that. But I really appreciate how she stuck with it and appreciate the film. Because, you know, it is difficult for Black women, women of color, to really be transparent about their lives, because we have such difficulties. I mean, and I wrote a book, Renegade for Peace and Justice, and I'll never forget writing about chapter 6. I didn't want to write about it, but you know, as a 15-year-old teenage pregnant girl, you know, I had to have an abortion in Mexico. This was before Roe versus Wade, and that tore me apart. But I am so committed to making sure that women have the right to a safe and legal abortion, because I've experienced that. I know what that trauma is like. I know what it's like, and why we have to repeal the Hyde Amendment, so that low-income women, women of color, have access to the same types of reproductive health services as women with money and middle-income women. So, you know, those kinds of stories are really hard to talk about. And yet I'm finding that there's so many young women who are having, I know, the same struggles as I had. And so if this film can help them navigate and not feel guilty or bad, or just recognize that this is life, this is the way this system works, this is how gender inequality works, and racial injustice works, and use your own personal experiences to try to shatter those systems and dismantle those structures and policies that have kept you from being who you are and living a full life. And so that's what I'm about, hopefully, that these horrific, and some of them are really pretty deep valley experiences that I've had, that I can communicate that to other women, so they know that they too can not only come out of it, but that once out of it, you can't just say, I made it. You know, you have to say, I've got to bring other women behind now, and I've got to do what I can do so nobody ever has to go through what I had to go through.
And you've managed to make it so inspiring and empowering rather than victimizing, which I think is so important to change the narrative, you know, and so us feminists can feel represented in someone else, you know. It's like, oh, you know, and cut through that noise of like patriarchal, you know, presentation of just power as this like, you know, this thing that is handed to you. So I really want to thank you for your generosity in sharing your story. I think it's brilliant. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about, you know, with all your experience. And I love some of the stories in the film, like that you fight to be able to be a cheerleader when you were 15, because it was only allowed for white girls in the school, like, and all the way, you know, to the Senate, to Congress. What do you think has changed in the conversation about feminism and racism? And what can we do, like, as like everyday citizens, to keep helping you, you know, enact this much needed systemic change?
Sure, and you know, yeah, when I was 15, again, during that period, I really wanted to be a cheerleader. And it wasn't said white girls only. It just said there's a small little committee and we select you. And you, by default, you had to be blonde and blue-eyed, right? So I knew I'd never make it. So I had to go to the NAACP, which I did, because I was working at a credit union. The president of the NAACP was my boss. I was on work study even then. And he said, we'll help you. And they helped me at San Fernando High change the rules of the game so that no more little small committee selection, but the entire student body could elect a cheerleader. And so I tried out in front of the student body. And guess what? I won. So I was the first African-American cheerleader elected at San Fernando High School. But also that same year, I'll never forget, a Japanese-American girl, Jeannie Tanaka, won also. So that kind of started, you know, the whole notion that women of color could be cheerleaders at San Fernando High School. And so now, and then, you know, I mean, it was hard. In California, I come from Texas. California, I thought racism was done with. It was even worse in many respects in California. And so how things have changed is I see more now of an intersection between gender and racial equality. Back then, and I got involved with Shirley Chisholm from Brooklyn. She was my mentor in her presidential campaign. And she constantly was fighting with African-American men about why she could run for president as a woman, as a feminist. And she was always debating white women because they didn't embrace the issues around racial inequality. And so you had this schism. Now I see, thank goodness, for our Black Lives Matter movement. Thank goodness for, I have to give a shout out to the All Above All Coalition, the young women around the country, multiracial, who are fighting to end the Hyde Amendment. You see more women now and the country really recognizing the intersectionality between gender inequality and racial inequality. That was not happening in the day at all. I mean, only until recently has the larger society come to grips with that fact.
Mm. And how did you both navigate it, making this film, you know, in the dysfunction, I mean, and doing your work representatively in within the ever increasing dysfunction in DC and the you know, divisiveness that we're seeing in politics? What's happening? How are you still being able to do this amazing work that you do?
I want to just come in here for 1 second and say something about one of the interviews that I did. The Republican in my film is a man named Walter Jones, who died in the last year or so. He was a diehard Republican that worked with Barbara, or Barbara worked with him, to deal with the resolution called the AUMF, you know, the Authorization for Use of Military Force. And he was one of the most heartfelt interviews I conducted for this film. You know, as he said, Barbara and I don't agree on everything, but we really agree on this. And he was so upset by the number of constituents in his district who were being killed in the endless wars, the 41, you know, military episodes we've been in since 9/11, that he really joined forces with her and tried to organize other Republicans to speak up and to vote the right way on this. And I just want to say it was moving, you know, I mean, so in terms of Barbara's ability to work across the aisle, it's a big point in the film. And I think it really reflects some understanding that she has about what it means to find allies on every issue. And I think she should speak more about it, but I just want to say it was an honor for me to get to interview Walter Jones and to hear what he had to say. And he's, as I say, quite represented in the film because, you know, he wasn't a likely ally. And yet on this issue about the AUMF, he totally stood with Barbara, you know, a year or so later. And I just thought it was a really interesting tribute, both to her ability to work across the aisle and to his ability to be authentic in terms of his values. So Barbara, say some more about that. But that to me gave me a little modicum of hope.
Well, you know, thanks, Abby, for that. I'm so glad you got to interview Walter before he passed away, because he was a true ally and a friend, and we did disagree on most issues. But again, we're intersectionality, where you come together and can agree, you focus on that and work on that. No one believes I worked with George Bush. I mean,
watch the film, you see it.
I mean, I led the effort for the Global AIDS Initiative that he signed. Everyone, naturally, he was the president, he signed it, and I give him a lot of credit. But I did that and negotiated with his team in the White House, okay? So I think what's important is to recognize the strength of Black women, and how we have to juggle. I mean, I had to do this all my life in the midst of chaos, in the midst of trying to raise my children, in the midst of fighting back racism and gender inequality. And so this is just another platform of in many ways, of chaos right now that Black women especially know how to deal with, because we've been dealing with this all our lives. And so it's no big deal. Sometimes people say, aren't you tired? Aren't you exhausted? What are you talking about? mean, and in the book, in the film, I think, Abby, you talked about when I was born, my mother had to have a C-section. They weren't gonna let her in the hospital because she was Black. And my grandmother had to fight to get her in the hospital. And my mother almost died in childbirth. I almost didn't get here. So do you think that this craziness with the Republicans in DC is gonna stop me or get me down? No, it just makes me fight harder. And I think when you see women of color and Black women and how we're dealing with this in Washington, DC, you'll understand that our strength is our power, and that's why we should be president of the United States.
Amen. Absolutely. Would you consider running?
No, at least vice president now.
In the future?
I hope everybody votes on November 3rd if this is out before November 3rd, because Kamala Harris, my sister from Oakland, California, who I endorsed in the presidential primary, will be our vice president. And so she's, you know, an African-American, Indian American woman who has that strength and tenacity to really change this country.
Absolutely. And just maybe to finish, I think that this is a very important time for documentary, helping to like amplify some important messages that are being like lost and cut through the noise of all these like fake news and just irrelevant things. And I wanted to ask you both, what do you think the documentary community and the documentary as a platform, you know, can do, and what can you leave the audience with to keep moving forward?
I'm going to start, okay? Just because I made this film in order to inspire people by Barbara Lee's example, but I didn't quite recognize the moment we were going to be in when the film was going to be seen. So I sort of had not anticipated this moment. And one of the things that is most gratifying to me from people who've recently seen the film at other festivals is their response that for the first time in many days, weeks, months, they actually feel a sense of hope and optimism because of this spirit of Barbara Lee's hard work, strength, commitment, and what she just said about ain't no way tired, you know, and I think that is going to motivate. I mean, again, that wasn't exactly what I thought of in terms of the context in which the film would be released. But now that we are here, I think that that example of you got to get up every day and, you know, fight the good fight and do the best you can and find allies wherever you can find them. It is the example that she sets, and it is a message to us all. So I am hoping that people will continue to be inspired by Barbara's example, by the work that she does. And we as constituents and as citizens have a lot to do to support the work she's doing. She's just, you know, initiated something called a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission. We need to support the idea of that getting through Congress. You know, she's done the work of introducing it. Then it becomes up to us to do something to see that it actually happens. And the same on saving reproductive health, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a role to be activated as citizens to support the work that she and others are doing on the floor of Congress.
Thanks, Abby. And it's HR 100, calling for a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission, which 40-some countries have established after genocides, crimes against humanity. This is a resolution that would set up a commission similar to that, where victims of this institution of slavery, of enslaved Africans 401 years ago being brought here, have never had that day of reckoning in America. And we have to have that day of reckoning for historical context for systemic racism, because a lot of people in my enlightened district couldn't understand why so many Black people and brown people were dying of COVID-19. And I had to explain 401 years ago and the chains of slavery, and how systemic racism is a reflection of 401 years ago. And that's how the only way we get to this truth-telling moment in this country to heal and move forward and transform this country with a system that's based on justice and racial equity. And of course, I support HR 40, which is reparations, because you've got to repair the damage. Otherwise, this generational trauma, the generational inequality will be here for another 401 years. So that's what HR 100 is about. Let me just say, in terms of today and what our young people are doing in the streets, Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives, how it's intergenerational, it's interracial, it's a movement that reminds me of the Black Panther Party movement in a lot of ways. I was a community worker with the Black Panther Party. And so I would suggest right now, listen to the young people, be inspired by them. I mean, I certainly am. Know that they see the future. I mean, they don't have to wait 50 years to get, for instance, some justice in policing. And so embrace what our young people are doing and help them understand also that this is a marathon. Enough is enough. We want it now, but we also have to get more women and more African-American women and women of color elected state, local, and national level to bring forth this transformation. And so if nothing else inspires me, it's just that the people, the young people in the streets who are saying enough is enough gives me everything I need to do to keep fighting with legislation, with funding priorities, with organizing, with whatever it takes. So that one, we can win on November 3rd, but so we can pass good policies and programs that will really begin to repair the damage of the past, which so many people today are suffering from. And we see this manifested in the tragic, disproportionate rates of Black and brown people contracting COVID-19 and dying from COVID-19. So everyone can play their part. Do not sit at home. Do not say there's nothing I can do. Don't feel down. Don't say you're exhausted. Just take a break. You know, just rest when you need to, but get up and keep going, because otherwise that 45 in the White House and his henchmen and women are going to destroy our democracy in our country. So that's not enough. I don't know what is.
And I want to say that, you know, what has kept me going throughout the last 4 years is that I was following Barbara Lee as she was doing this amazing work. And so who had time to be depressed? It was like I was just scurrying after her and constantly being inspired by what I saw and what I learned. So
yeah, and you have to have hope. You have to have a vision. Otherwise, the people perish. So please, whoever is listening to this, viewing this, just know that I hope what little contribution that I can make and what big contribution Abby made with making me do this film, I hope it really does give you something to move forward with, and to, even in the period of COVID and this horrific time that we're in, know that you too can help and make a difference and help transform this country.
Well, it's such an honor to meet you both. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby, for bringing this incredible story of hope and inspiration to us. I feel like I've been transformed also for knowing
thank you.
Representative Lee. So thank you very much. It's been an honor to have you with us.
Nice seeing you, Ruth. Thanks, Abby.
Bye, Barbara.
Good being with everyone. Bye-bye.